Nikon and Canon spent 2 decades battling it out for DSLR supremacy. I've got to say, the Canon F-mount is really good at coming in second place because, according to the only expert that matters, the Nikon F-mount is the greatest camera mount ever made. From its debut in 1959, Nikon has released somewhere around 400 lenses for it, before its effective discontinuation in 2020. Once you factor in all the third-party options, there are thousands of different lenses out there. All but the very earliest lenses are compatible with the 18 full-frame DSLRs that Nikon released from 2007 to 2020. The exception being the DF, which can use any lens. Having jumped around to most of the camera systems out there, Nikon really stands out as my favorite for photography. Although no one is going to complain about any of the DSLRs being good at video. People wanting hybrid cameras have been dumping, in lots of cases, minty fresh bodies and lenses onto the used market, really driving down prices. It's shocking how cheap a lot of the gear has gotten, which leads me to say that we're in a golden age of digital imaging. But before I get into the 34 lens recommendations, I'll quickly go over how you can identify the lenses that will potentially damage your camera mount, the acronyms you need to know and their associated lens compatibility, and since buying's the fun part, I'll start off by going through some of the most popular entry-level lenses which offer the best price to performance you're going to be able to find. After that, I'll go through some more wide-angle options, then standard focal ranges, and finally telephoto lenses. Macros will get their own video, and then you'll need to let me know if you want me to go over specialty, exotic, or novelty lenses. The lenses that will potentially damage the aperture follower tab of your camera are known as non-AI lenses. These were used from 1959 to 1977, and they can be easily identified because there are no cutouts on the aperture ring. I'm pretty sure I have an older video that goes over how to identify these and also how to modify them to work on newer cameras. Mounting them will require a significant amount of effort, which you should always avoid when mounting any lens to a camera. I don't think this is a huge deal because you'll have to go hunting for these lenses to find them. Next are the AFP lenses, of which there's only one full frame, and that is the 70-300. And if you want to use that lens, you'll likely have to upgrade the firmware on your camera if you're already not using the latest firmware for it. The rest of the AFP lenses are DX lenses. Those are designed for crop sensor cameras, and while you can use them on your camera, you'll go into a crop mode, and so you'll lose quite a bit of resolution. AI and AIS lenses were released after 1977, and these are manual focus 35mm film SLR lenses. AF and AFD lenses are the first autofocus lenses that Nikon released starting in 1986. The AFD versions provide the camera body with distance information so the camera knows how far away the lens is focused. They also have physical aperture rings. If you want to set the aperture with the camera, you'll need to set them to the largest aperture. This is an orange color, and some of them have locks which may or may not be functional. And if you don't do that, you'll probably see an error on the camera screen. The autofocus in these lenses are powered by a screw drive motor that is located in the camera body. As a result, the autofocus is not very fast and can be noisy. AFS lenses use silent wave motors, and those have faster, more accurate, and quieter autofocus. Next up is VR, which stands for vibration reduction. This is Nikon's name for optical image stabilization, and I would recommend trying to get this with any lens that you purchase, but it's generally more important the longer the focal length of your lens. The optical image stabilization will allow you to use slower shutter speeds, a lower ISO, or increase your depth of field while still getting nice sharp images. DX just means that a lens was made for a crop body camera, and I would avoid using these lenses on full frame bodies. The body will go into a crop mode and you will lose a significant amount of resolution. FX means that the lens was designed for full frame bodies, so I would go after those lenses. And that would include the AF and AFD lenses, as those were originally made for 35mm film cameras, which are full frame. G indicates that the lens does not have a physical aperture ring. Everything is set electronically, but it still has the little aperture lever. E stands for electromagnetic diaphragm mechanism. So in addition to controlling the aperture with the camera, the lens stops down the aperture electronically instead of relying on a physical linkage. And finally, IF is internal focus. This is a nice feature to have because some lenses will extend the front element when focusing, and then some of the cheaper ones may also cause the front element to rotate. And rotating the front element can be an issue if you're using a circular polarizer or a graduated ND filter. I use eBay sold listings for prices. eBay is generally where I find the best deals online, but I would recommend that you look in as many places as possible. The more places you look, the more likely you are to find a great deal. There are affiliate links in the description to my top lens choices. First up is going to be a pair of 50mm, with the first being the 50mm f1.8D. This lens uses a double Gauss design, which is common with older manual focus 50mm. It's not sharp corner to corner, it doesn't have a flat field of view, it vignettes, it's slow to autofocus. It's also my favorite Nikon lens. It was released in 2002 and Nikon still sells it new. So that's any sign as to how popular of a lens it is. If you want faster autofocus and corner-to-corner sharpness, the 50mm f1.8G is a great choice. What's nice with that one is that it can be easily adapted to the Nikon Z series mirrorless cameras and you'll have autofocus. I really like the 50mm lenses as they give a standard field of view, and that simply means that what you see with your eyes is going to be very similar to what the camera is going to frame. They make photography feel natural and makes it easy to learn. My first recommendation for any camera is always going to be a 50mm or equivalent lens. The Nikon AFS 24-85 f3.5-4.5G ED VR was the Nikon D610 kit lens. These are easy to find because of how many were produced, and at the same time, pretty inexpensive. It's going to do a great job at family get-togethers, events, vacations, or just general photography. It's easy to walk around with it all day because it's not overly large or too heavy. For wildlife, sports, or action, you're probably going to want a lens with more reach. The other plentiful kit lens is the 24-120 f4G ED VR. It was the kit lens with the Nikon D750. I like zooms with fixed apertures. The increased zoom range is also going to be useful for taking portraits. This is another great choice for a do-it-all lens that you can carry around with you all day. Though I had one with my D750 and I went on to sell it because it was just a little too large and heavy for my liking. I also found that the telescoping zoom made it a little unwieldy and it wasn't the best handling. I know I'm probably in the minority with that opinion, but you can check the comments and see what other people think of that lens. Wide-angle lenses are lots of fun, and there is a trio of inexpensive f2.8D lenses, a 20, a 24, and a 28mm. These are going to be great for architecture, landscapes, street, groups, or stylized photos. They make it very easy to get everything you see in the frame. You can easily get an exaggerated perspective with the 20 or 24, and those are probably going to have a slight amount of barrel distortion. They use the in-body camera motor to focus, so the autofocus is not very fast, and if you adapt them to mirrorless, you will not have autofocus. I don't think that's a big issue. The focus throw isn't very long, and if you stop the lenses down, pretty much everything is going to be in focus, so manually focusing them isn't that difficult. The one deal breaker might be that they are not weather sealed. If you want to wake up before dawn to catch golden hour, regardless of the weather conditions, the 1.8G versions are probably going to be better choices. My recommendation would be to pick how wide you want to go. I generally find 20s to be too wide for my tastes. I would probably go with a 24 for landscapes or architecture, and then a 28 for, say, street or general photography. If, on the other hand, 20 isn't wide enough for you, there is a AFS 16-35 f4G ED-VR. This lens is nice because you can use filters on it. Some wide zooms have large bulbous front elements that prevent that. And while I've made fun of Nikon's video capabilities, this would be a good video lens. It's also great to adapt to a DX body if you have one of those. Even taking the crop factor into account, it'll still be a wide lens. Getting into the telephotos, the 85 1.8G is going to be the obvious choice. You should be able to find one for less than $300, which is less than half the price of the newer 85 1.8S for the Nikon Z series cameras. If you're looking to shoot it wide open and melt backgrounds, you probably want to set up the AF fine tune function in your camera. This is because the AF sensors are not on the image sensor, so a small misalignment can cause the lens to front or back focus. You can tell this will happen because you'll never be able to get an eye completely in focus. It'll be very hit or miss. You can buy a pop-up lens calibration tool or use a ruler set at a 45-degree angle. The setup process should take maybe 30 minutes, and after that you'll be able to nail focus every time. I will link to the Nikon support article that goes through this process. For a zoom, the 70-300 f4.5 to 5.6G VR is always going to be my recommendation for an entry into sports, wildlife, or action. It has the reach required to start being useful, and it's not overly large or cumbersome to use. You're not going to need a monopod for support, as it's relatively small enough to be easily handheld. A faster aperture would be nice to have for indoor or night sports, but the price is extremely compelling. Be careful when buying this lens because there are DX versions that are similar in price, and you don't want to buy one of those by mistake. There is a newer AFP version, but it's still new enough and there aren't a lot out there, so it's hard to get a good deal on a used copy of it. There are faster wide-angle lenses, and that's going to be the trio of 1.8Gs. Again, there's a 20, 24, and 28 millimeter option. All three are going to be sharper, have less distortion, and faster autofocus than their 2.8D counterparts. What really sets them apart is that they are all weather resistant. You can tell because they have a rubber grommet around the lens mount. If you're into landscape, hiking, or nature, any one of these is going to be a great choice. I briefly had the 20mm and I quickly realized that not only was I bad at landscapes, but also at architecture and hiking. If you want to go wider, there is a 14-24 f2.8G, though you're not going to be able to use filters with this lens as it has a large bulbous front element. I think it looks cool and the faster fixed aperture is nice to have. I don't really have any thoughts on the lens other than that, though the price is pretty nice. And then on to more 50mm options. There is a 51.4G. New, it was more than twice the price of the 1.8G. Now it's maybe $50 more expensive, which makes it pretty attractive. I again have an unpopular opinion of preferring 1.8s over the 1.4s. Stop down, I don't think you're going to be able to notice that much of a difference in image quality. But what you are more likely to notice is the increased size and weight, especially if you're going to be carrying around several lenses with you. There's also a 51.4D, and what's interesting about these is that they're basically the same price as the 1.4G. I think that just goes to show that there are lots of people out there that prefer the less clinically sharp rendering of the D-series lenses. If you haven't used any of the D-series lenses, I think that you're missing out. The step up from the 2-kit zooms are probably 4 of the 6 24-70s that are available. Nikon made 2 different versions. The first is a 2.8G without VR. I don't think that's a huge drawback because even at 70mm, you're not going to have a shutter speed that is that fast to avoid camera shake. Additionally, it's also going to be a good choice to adapt to a camera with IBIS because you can rely on that for image stabilization. The next version, which is the most expensive of these 6, is the f2.8e ED VR. And keep in mind with these, or any of the 24-70s I'm mentioning, these are workhorse lenses that get beat up. You want to pay close attention when shopping for used copies of these. Avoid any of them that look like they have been abused. And make sure to thoroughly test them when you get one. You're looking for signs of a lens element being decentered. And you can identify this by taking a photo of a flat surface like a building and seeing if any of the corners are out of focus. Then there are 2 Tamron options, the first being the SP 24-70 f2.8 DI VC USD, and it has a model number of A007, and you want N because Tamron sold these in multiple camera mounts. You don't want to end up buying a Canon EF version based on your or a seller's mistake. It does have VC, that's vibration control, which is Tamron's name for their optical image stabilization. Though, unless you can find an absolute banger of a deal, I would shy away from this lens. The build-in image quality aren't going to be the best. That's why Tamron released the 24-70 f2.8 DI VC USD G2. This has an A032N product number. The G2 lenses are when Tamron really stepped up and became a premier lens manufacturer. Image and build quality are greatly improved. So if you want an inexpensive 24-70, the G2 version is the one I would recommend hunting for. Then there are the 2 Sigma options. People are basically giving away the 24-70 f2.8 IF EX DG HSM, and that's because the lens has a few downsides. The first being the lack of image stabilization, followed by a relatively poor image and build quality. And you should really be concerned about the poor build quality. These are lenses that will break. Just like Tamron, Sigma really stepped up and improved the image and build quality of their lenses. This can be seen with their release of the 24-70 f2.8 DG OSM HSM Art. And as you'll notice, there is quite a difference in price between the 2 versions. And that's because everything about the lens is better. It's really impressive how Sigma was able to increase the quality decade after decade to where now they are a premier lens manufacturer. Before I get to the 10 70-200s, there is an 85 f1.4G, which I don't really care about. The depth of field is going to be paper thin wide open, and I prefer getting the nose, eyes, and ears in focus with a portrait. Nailing focus with this lens wide open is going to be difficult, even if you go through the AF fine-tuning process in your camera. That's why I prefer 1.8s, though if you're going to be shooting tons of portraits, yes, this lens can definitely make sense. Or does it? Because the 105 f2D DC is perhaps one of the best f-mount portrait lenses ever made. It was in production from 1993 to 2021. That gives you any idea of the consensus on the quality of the lens. The DC stands for defocus control, which gives you control over the bokeh produced by the lens. This allows you to melt backgrounds at any aperture. It's on my shopping list, so maybe pass on it so prices don't get driven up. Then a couple of telephoto zoom options are the Nikon AF-VR 80-400 f4.5-5.6D ED. This is a sharp lens, though I wouldn't want to use it for sports or action because the autofocus is going to be relatively slow. But the price is attractive. There is an updated AFS version, but that doesn't make sense to me because similar in price is going to be the 200-500 f5.6E, which is the mid-level sports, wildlife, action lens to get. Shooting wide open, you're going to get razor sharp images across the entire zoom range of the lens. Yes, there's the Tamron G2 150-600, and Sigma has a 150-600 in the sport or contemporary lines, but I would rather have the 200-500 millimeter Nikon. And now on to all the 70-200s, and we'll start with the Nikon 70-200 f4 ED VR. This has the advantage of being smaller and lighter than all the other options. I'm all for smaller and lighter lenses, and the price makes this one very attractive. If you're not getting paid, this is the 70-200 that I would want to carry around all day. Nikon also made 3 f.2 versions, and image quality is going to track with price. The first was the f2.8G VR IF ED. Again, I cannot reiterate this enough. These were workhorse lenses. You want to find one that was lightly used by a hobbyist. It's not going to be a good deal if the lens is beat up. The 2.8G ED VR2 is newer and it comes with improvements in image quality. It's also not going to kill you on price, so I think this is more attractive than the first one. The advantage of the third, the f2.8E FL ED VR, is the fluoride lens element or elements, which greatly reduces the weight of the lens. I'm not sure how many fluoride elements are in there. It's also going to have the best image quality of any of the 70-200s that I'm going to go over. Though you're definitely going to pay for that. I don't think this lens makes sense for a lot of the older DSLRs, but if I had a D5, D6, D850, or D500, this is the one I would want to use with those cameras. Tamron also made 3, with the first being the f2.8 LD-DI SP-IF macro, and it has a product number of A001N, and just look at the product page. This is an old lens and it's going to come with all the problems associated with those. They're really cheap for a reason. Next is the f2.8 SPVC USD, and it has a product number of A009N. I would really only consider this lens if you're able to find a great deal on it. I know it's definitely going to be an attractive option because of how low the price is, but that is due to the not stellar build quality. I don't want you to run into issues with the lens after heavy use. The Tamron to get is the DI VC USD G2. It has a product number of A025N. It's really hard to go wrong with any of the G2 lenses. Just make sure to put it through its paces when you get it while the return window is still open. I don't want you to end up with a bad copy of the lens. As long as you do that, they are probably the best value. Finally, there are the Sigmas, which I was wrong about. I thought there were 3, and there are actually 6 of them. I would avoid the first 4, as they were made between 1999 and 2007, and they all lack optical image stabilization. They are the EX-APO, EX-DG, EX-DG Macro HSM, and EX-DG Macro HSM2. I would avoid these, and they are pretty easy to avoid. There aren't very many on the used market, as attributed to their relatively poor build quality. So even with the low prices, I would want a phenomenal deal before I would consider buying any of them. Then there is the APO EX-DG OS HSM. This lens benefits from having image stabilization. However, it was released in 2010, and at that point in time, Sigma had not yet stepped up their build quality. The Sigma lens to get would be the DG OS HSM Sport. The Sport moniker indicates that it has a more robust build quality, as it was designed to be used on the sidelines of sports. So if you're ever looking for a Sigma lens, keep in mind that you want it to be either a contemporary, sport, or art version. With that said, I think I would put my effort into trying to find a good deal on a Tamron G2. So that wraps everything up, and hopefully you have a good idea of the lenses that you're looking for. There's still so many Nikon F-mount lenses out there. I could probably make a dozen videos going over them. So let me know if you want to see more. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next video.